Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Carnodal. Utah has permanently removed over a dozen books from public schools per a new state law governing, quote-unquote, sensitive instructional materials. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, first, can you lay out this law for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a relatively recent law from the state of Utah that was passed by the legislature, and essentially it amends certain provisions, regarding the evaluation of instructional material to remove pornographic or indecent material. So that's like from the description of the bill on the legislature's website, and essentially it lays out here is what we're talking about, and it requires we've had a lot of debates in the last few years about content moderation in terms of school libraries, in terms of school curricula. And this one basically just says, and literally spells it out, it says it requires the prioritization of protecting children from illicit pornography over other considerations in evaluating instructional material. So this is, again, from the summary of the law. That was a direct quote. And then it specifies individuals who may trigger a formal sensitive material review. It establishes certain required processes for the evaluation and review of sensitive material allegations, including distinct requirements for objective sensitive material and subjective sensitive material, so that we have that kind of distinction between objective sensitive material and subjective sensitive material. And then back into it, it also requires that certain actions statewide, if a certain threshold of local education agencies determine that the instructional material constitutes objective sensitive material, subject to a vote of the state board to overturn the statewide action in certain circumstances. And what this is, and this is really interesting because it's different from a lot of other states, is that it's saying that if enough school boards remove instructional material, like these books, over these like objective sensitive material, like they kind of rise that level of like they're objectively sensitive, or like they have like these kinds of themes in them, then they're put on a statewide list essentially, and they have to they have to be removed across the state because these school boards have removed them. So it's a very interesting kind of twist in terms of like how a lot of states are doing these sorts of like content moderation. Like I think that there has been other kinds of things. I think, parental privacy, but this is really kind of getting into here's what is appropriate for students. And if enough school boards say this is sensitive, we're not going to have this in our school libraries, then it actually puts it on a statewide list of saying like no school district can have this. And I believe they have to get rid of it. Like they can't donate it. They have to, throw it away. So it's a very interesting, kind of aspect of the law there. And then there's some other stuff about, how you hold, different things. There's some technical sorts of aspects of the law too, in terms of like who you sue if you need to, there's some of the things that are often built into that to give it a little bit of teeth.
And so what are kind of the arguments surrounding this law? I'm sure a lot of it is probably similar to ones that we've heard before, but what specific concerns are people raising?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is very similar, I think, in terms of, the sorts of debates that we've had. And so there are, questions, that parents have of like, why is this? And a lot of religious parents, or maybe conservative leaning parents, they might be saying like, well, why is this in my child's school library? And we've seen a lot of interest in this from groups like Moms for Liberty, right? Where you have people getting up in front of a school board and then they're cut off because they're reading some of the stuff that's very profane, or maybe has a lot of, sort of explicit content, like a sex scene, right? That's pretty graphic in terms of what it's describing. And, we've seen a lot of people saying that, and generating a lot of interest in a lot of like YouTube, clicks and stuff of like a parent gets her microphone pulled because she was reading from this book that students are allowed to read in the school library, right? So it's kind of like putting that, on its head as on full display. And so you basically there you have the argument that like our kids should not be exposed to this, and like no child should have this in a school library. Not that they can't read it on their own because it's out there. Like they can go to a Barnes and Noble, or they can go to the local library, but it's not at school. So that's kind of the one argument. And then on the other side, you have people saying, well, like, look, kids who are sexual minority youth, right? LGBTQ plus youth, they're saying, advocates for them are saying they need to have material that reflects their identity. And what the, other side, for lack of a term, is going after are a lot of these materials that maybe describe like characters who are LGBTQ plus, right, who have these different sorts of sexual minority identities and are trying to explore these themes. And they're saying it's so important and vital for them to like be affirmed in the literature that they're reading. So how could you try to take that away from them? And so then you're kind of stuck in there. Like there's a lot of like, as you can imagine, very emotional debates about, you're either erasing these identities or you're saying, oh, you have smut in school libraries. And it's sort of like that's the back and forth. So it's a lot of mudslinging, I think, that happens. But at a state level, this is kind of the similar sort of thing of trying. And then in this case, it's definitely going on that one side of the, we're not going to have this in our school libraries.
There's also some concerns about like the democratic process and how this reflects that. What are the concerns there?
Yeah, I think that's some critics of this law have said, that mechanism that I talked about where you have, maybe let's say 3 school boards. I think that is a threshold. It's like if 3 school boards remove it, then it's put on the list and it has to be removed from all of them. And that was the case here. There's like a Google document or a Google document that shows like here's which titles are banned statewide, which books are banned statewide, removed from library shelves, kind of shy away from that banning terminology, just because I think it's driven with a lot of like emotion, right, of like book banners and stuff. But like these are ones that are being called for removal statewide. And critics of that say, why can't our school board make a different decision? Like that's what local control is all about, right? And so that, that's the point of having a local school board is so that this community, like let's say that you're a liberal enclave town in a very Republican leaning state. And so you can say like, well, look, like we're all fine with it. Like, why shouldn't we be able to say we're okay with this for our kids? Or, another way, like, this is the point of a democracy is that we can run our towns differently. We can run our school boards differently so that this kind of top down thing does not really work. So that is, a criticism of the law that is, very much, I think, rooted in sort of that democratic argument, as you mentioned.
And so you mentioned that a handful of titles so far have reached that threshold and based off this law have been, called for removal. What are some of those titles?
Yeah, there's a lot of Sarah J. Maas in there. There's, a lot of like A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Frost and Starlight, A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Silver Flames, Empire of Storms. I think that's everything from Sarah Maas and a lot of different courts in there, but that's kind of all from a different series. And then there's What Girls Are Made Of by Elena Arnold, Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, Forever by Judy Blume, Tilt and Fallout by Ellen Hopkins, and then Oryx and Crake from Margaret Atwood. And then the last one is Blankets by Craig Thompson. And so that's the complete list of the titles. So, and again, the determination is for removal is from at least three school districts or at least 2 school districts and 5 charter schools. So that's kind of how they have like the threshold. So if 3 school districts remove it, then it's removed statewide, or 2 school districts and 5 charter schools. So that's kind of like a specific threshold. And these were all met early in August 2nd. I'm guessing that there's going to be another update in September. I don't know how often they're going to be updating the sensitive materials list, but it might be monthly. And so we might have more intel on this come September.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story, and listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.